There are moments in life when the ordinary begins to tremble, when the routines lose their flavor and the world, though unchanged, feels strangely hollow. In such moments, do not seek distraction, listen. For the soul, long before it found form in flesh, whispered a sacred intent. It did not arrive empty or accidental, it carried seeds. These seeds are your tendencies, your longings, your quiet obsessions. And though the world may attempt to mold you into one of its prefabricated roles, the soul waits, with timeless patience, for the moment you will remember. The concept of the self, in its deepest psychological sense, is not simply the ego or the conscious personality that navigates day-to-day life. It is a totality, a center that encompasses both the conscious and the unconscious realms of the psyche. While the ego is the lighted portion of the mind, the self is the entire psychic structure, the whole of who we are, including all that lies hidden or disowned. In this way, the self is not merely a part of us, it is the very blueprint of our being. It is the inner architect that quietly directs the course of our development, often without our conscious awareness. The self is not created, it is discovered. It is not shaped by societal values, but rather it draws us toward values that resonate with our inner truth. From the earliest moments of life, signs of the self's presence begin to appear. The interests we form, the fears that shadow us, the emotions that persist despite logic, all of these are expressions of an inner structure that is not entirely created by personal experience. The self is pre-existent. It existed before we were conscious of it. This is why certain images, dreams, or symbols have such a mysterious pull on us. They are not random. They are messages from the deeper layers of the psyche, attempting to bring us into closer alignment with the self. There is a natural tension between the ego and the self. The ego seeks control, definition, and security. It likes categories, roles, and goals. The self, however, is more fluid. It is vast, mysterious, and sometimes contradictory. Its aim is not success or conformity, but wholeness, and so the journey toward the self often begins in crisis. When the structures that once sustained us begin to falter, when identity becomes too narrow or brittle to contain our deeper longings, the self begins to emerge. It does not knock politely. It erupts, often through emotional turmoil, dreams, synchronicities, and existential questioning. Dreams are one of the primary languages of the self. They bypass the rational mind and present truths through images, myth, and metaphor. In dreams, we encounter parts of ourselves we have long forgotten or rejected. A child running through a forest, a wise old figure speaking in riddles, an animal guiding us through darkness. These are not just mental fictions. They are voices of the self calling us home. Each symbol in a dream is a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of our larger identity. To work with dreams is to open a dialogue with the self. The self also expresses itself through what is known as the process of individuation. This is not self-improvement in the conventional sense. It is not about becoming better or more efficient. It is about becoming more whole. Individuation requires that we confront our shadow, those aspects of ourselves we have denied, repressed, or deemed unacceptable. These may be traits like anger, ambition, vulnerability, or even joy, depending on what we have disowned. By recognizing and integrating the shadow, we begin to reclaim parts of the self that were previously unconscious. The self may also appear through archetypal patterns, universal forms that appear across cultures and epochs. The hero, the mother, the sage, the trickster. These are not just literary devices. They are templates that live within the human psyche. When you feel drawn to a particular archetype or find yourself playing a recurring role in relationships or decisions, it may be the self attempting to shape your life through mythic dimensions. Archetypes point to underlying psychological forces that guide us, often invisibly. They are pathways the self uses to express itself through personality, vocation, love, and suffering. Another way the self reveals itself is through the experience of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect. When the inner world and outer world suddenly align in a way that feels charged with meaning, the self is at work. You think of a person you haven't spoken to in years, and they call. You read a phrase that perfectly articulates a thought you could not previously express. These events do not happen by chance. They are glimpses into a deeper order where psyche and world are not separate but woven together. The self, in its quiet insistence, often leads us into unfamiliar terrain. It may disrupt the status quo, pull us away from what is safe, and challenge our cherished assumptions. It does not reward avoidance. If ignored, it manifests as restlessness, dissatisfaction, anxiety, or even physical illness. The self will be heard one way or another. When we heed its call, we begin to live from a deeper place, not just reacting to life, but participating in it as a meaningful unfolding. This does not eliminate pain or hardship, but it changes our relationship to them. We begin to see suffering not as punishment, but as initiation. It is important to understand that the self is not a fixed point. It is a dynamic, evolving reality. We do not become the self. We continually become more of it. Every phase of life reveals new dimensions of the self. What calls to us at 20 may differ radically from what calls at 50, yet both are expressions of the same inner totality. The self expands through paradox, through allowing opposites to coexist, strength and vulnerability, light and shadow, chaos and order. Ultimately, the self is our true nature, but not in the shallow sense of personality or preference. It is the deep root system of the soul. It connects us to the collective psyche of humanity, to ancestral memory, to the symbols and stories that have guided civilizations. And yet, it is also intensely personal. It knows your name, your history, your wounds, and your unique path. It waits not for perfection, but for authenticity. To live in alignment with the self is to say yes to life, not just the life we desire, but the life that asks to be lived through us. The self does not demand clarity before movement. It asks only for trust, that if we follow the subtle threads of meaning, we will be guided not to ease or certainty, but to purpose, and to the deep peace that comes with becoming what we were always meant to be. Long before we knew how to name our emotions, long before we could speak of love or courage or despair, these forces already lived within us, moving in symbolic shapes, whispering to us through stories, rituals, and dreams. The modern mind, with all its marvels, often forgets that it did not invent the human experience. It inherited it. Buried deep in the psyche are ancient patterns, older than language, older even than personal memory. These are not simply the results of childhood or environment. They are what Carl Jung called archetypes, fundamental, universal forms and motifs that shape human behavior, imagination, and perception from the inside out. To understand archetypal imprints is to understand that we are not blank slates at birth. We come into the world already scripted with psychic templates that give form to our desires, fears, values, and goals. These imprints are not conscious. They reside in what Jung termed the collective unconscious, a shared psychic reservoir that transcends individual identity and links us to the vast continuity of humanity. It is through these archetypes that the soul remembers its deeper story, the one not written by society, but encoded in the very essence of the psyche. Imagine you are a child again. Before you were taught to name the world around you, you already had certain reactions: curiosity toward light, fear of the dark, awe at thunder, warmth in the presence of a gentle face. These were not learned. They were activated. The moment your environment resonated with something ancient inside you, a spark occurred. That spark was the moment an archetype began to breathe. Archetypes are not characters. They are psychic fields of energy. Yet they are most often recognized through their personified forms: the hero, the mother, the shadow, the trickster, the sage. These are not just literary devices or cultural roles. They are alive within us, influencing how we interpret the world and our place in it. They manifest through mythology, religion, art, and everyday relationships. The archetype of the mother, for instance, is not limited to one's personal mother. It encompasses nurturing, creation, protection, and also the darker faces of overprotection or smothering control. One may see this archetype in a grandmother, a teacher, even a stranger who offers comfort. The image awakens something primordial, the instinct to be held, to be safe, to belong. Similarly, the hero archetype compels us to act with courage, to face trials, to leave comfort behind in pursuit of transformation. It is not always dramatic. The hero may not always wield a sword or save a nation. Sometimes the hero is the one who gets out of bed in the morning while carrying unbearable grief. Sometimes the hero is the one who dares to leave a toxic situation or chooses to forgive when the wound is still fresh. Wherever there is struggle, there is the hero archetype, guiding, challenging, whispering that this pain has purpose, that this journey is sacred. One might wonder, if these patterns are universal, why do they appear so uniquely in each individual? Why does one person live predominantly through the lover archetype while another seems guided by the sage? The answer lies in what Jung saw as the dynamic interplay between the archetypes and the individual psyche. While all archetypes exist within each of us, different ones are activated at different times based on personal history, environment, and the soul's particular calling. Some archetypes dominate a lifetime, others emerge only during crises or transitions. These shifts are not random. They are signs of psychological evolution, as the self nudges the ego toward growth and wholeness. An important realization in this journey is that we do not choose our archetypes in the conscious sense. Rather, life circumstances act as triggers that awaken specific archetypal energies. A betrayal might awaken the wounded healer, prompting us to explore emotional depths and eventually guide others. The death of a loved one might awaken the sage, shifting our awareness toward spiritual insight and inner meaning. A sudden success might activate the ruler, calling us to wield responsibility with integrity. These shifts are not external changes only, they are inner initiations. Each archetype carries both light and shadow, and to embody one fully is to confront its totality. Take the shadow archetype, for example. It is perhaps the most misunderstood and feared, yet it is the key to integration. The shadow contains the parts of ourselves we reject or deny: jealousy, rage, selfishness, vulnerability, sexuality, shame. These qualities are not evil, they are human. When ignored, the shadow grows monstrous. When acknowledged, it becomes a source of immense power and healing. Many people meet their shadow through projections, accusing others of what they secretly struggle with in themselves. The moment we realize that what disturbs us in another might also live within us, we have taken the first step toward wholeness. Working with archetypes is not a theoretical exercise, it is lived. It is felt in the body, the heart, the soul. When we dream of flying, of falling, of being chased, we are touching archetypal stories that go back thousands of years. When we are moved by a song, a painting, a myth, we are feeling the archetype resonate within. And when we find ourselves drawn to certain people, places, or paths for no logical reason, it may be that the archetype has already chosen us. Life becomes infinitely more meaningful when viewed through this symbolic lens. The difficulties we face are not merely personal misfortunes, but mythic trials. The heartbreaks are not failures, but rites of passage. The strange synchronicities are not coincidences, but hints from the unconscious. In this way, archetypes help us reframe reality. They offer narrative where there was chaos, dignity where there was shame, and guidance where there was confusion. Ultimately, to live in harmony with one's archetypal imprints is to live mythically. It is to see one's life not as random events strung together, but as a purposeful unfolding of inner potential. It is to recognize that your unique struggles are also universal, that your journey echoes those of countless souls across time. And in this realization, we begin to see ourselves not as isolated egos, but as meaningful expressions of something much larger, something timeless, sacred, and deeply interconnected. We are each shaped by these archetypal energies, not as puppets of fate, but as co-creators of a deeper story. Our souls carry memories older than the body, patterns older than culture, truths older than language. These truths do not ask to be believed. They ask only to be remembered, honored, and lived, fully and courageously, as part of the collective unconscious. There are times in life when the surface no longer satisfies. A person may have success, love, recognition, yet still feel a strange disquiet beneath it all. This disquiet is not a flaw to be dismissed. It is a summons. Something ancient in the soul begins to stir, as if waking from a long slumber, and it calls the individual not toward more of what they have, but toward something deeper, something truer. This is the beginning of the process of individuation. Individuation is not improvement. It is not a matter of polishing the personality until it shines, or eliminating undesirable traits to become acceptable in the eyes of others. It is not about becoming good, but about becoming whole. Wholeness implies the union of opposites, the integration of all that has been disowned, ignored, or banished to the shadow. It means to embrace complexity, to hold contradictions, to make peace with paradox. In this sense, individuation is a sacred task, a psychological and spiritual initiation that asks everything of us. From childhood onward, we are encouraged, often unconsciously, to develop a persona, a mask we wear to navigate the demands of society. The persona is not inherently false. It helps us function, belong, and communicate, but problems arise when the mask is mistaken for the whole face. We begin to believe we are only what the world reflects back to us. Our roles, titles, accomplishments, and identities become cages, however gilded. The deeper self, rich with unknown content, begins to rebel. Symptoms of this rebellion can appear as anxiety, depression, or a growing sense of disconnection. These are not illnesses to be cured, but signals to be understood. The soul speaks in symptoms when it has been silenced for too long. At the heart of individuation lies the confrontation with the unconscious. What has been repressed or forgotten, old wounds, unresolved patterns, buried potential, demands recognition. One cannot heal what one refuses to face, and so the journey inward begins. This is rarely a smooth or linear path. It is more often a descent before it is a rise, a dark night before there is dawn. The myths of the world reflect this truth. Whether it is Orpheus descending into the underworld, Dante journeying through hell, or Inanna facing her shadow in the depths, all great transformations require a reckoning with darkness. To individuate is to engage with the shadow, the aspects of ourselves we have been taught to fear or reject. Anger, jealousy, pride, lust, envy, vulnerability, weakness. These are not bad in themselves. They are energies we have not yet learned to hold with maturity and grace. When denied, they do not disappear. They manifest as projections, as triggers, as irrational behaviors that confuse us. But when we take the courageous step to admit them into consciousness, they lose their destructive power and become sources of insight and vitality. The shadow, once integrated, is not our enemy but our ally. It contains the very elements we need to be whole. Dreams play a crucial role in individuation. They are the voice of the unconscious, speaking in symbols and images. In dreams, the psyche reveals its secrets. A house with hidden rooms, a journey through a forest, a confrontation with a wild animal, all these are not merely fictions. They are maps. They show us where we are and what we need. Learning to read this symbolic language is not a matter of logic, but of intuition, humility, and trust. The dream is not trying to confuse, it is trying to awaken. It is the soul's way of leading the ego toward wholeness. Along the way, we encounter archetypes, universal psychic patterns that serve as guides and challenges. The hero pushes us to overcome trials. The wise old man offers wisdom. The anima or animus draws us toward integration of the opposite within. These are not just images in stories, they live in us. They surface in moments of crisis, inspiration, and profound choice. To see one's life through the lens of myth is not to romanticize it, but to recognize that our inner world is structured by ancient motifs. We are not as alone or as random as we think. The path has been walked before, though each walk is unique. Individuation requires not only introspection, but also action. Insight alone is not enough. We must embody what we discover. If the dream shows us our power, we must begin to speak our truth. If the shadow reveals our pain, we must make space for healing. If an archetype calls us toward a new role or vocation, we must answer. The soul respects movement. It does not require perfection, only sincerity. Relationships, too, are mirrors on the path. Through others, we meet ourselves. Love, conflict, betrayal, forgiveness. These are alchemical vessels in which the raw material of the psyche is transformed. A partner may trigger our deepest wounds, not because they are cruel, but because the wound is ready to be seen. A child may awaken long forgotten joy or fear. A friend may challenge us to grow in ways we never anticipated. Every meaningful encounter is an opportunity for reflection and expansion. Time is also a factor in individuation. This is not a process that can be rushed. It unfolds according to its own rhythm, often in cycles. One period may be about reclaiming creativity, another may be about healing generational trauma, another may require solitude, silence, or letting go. Each season serves a purpose. The ego often wants control, clarity, and completion. The soul asks for patience, presence, and trust. Perhaps the most difficult part of individuation is the letting go of who we thought we were. The identity we clung to, the goals we pursued, the image we upheld, all may need to be shed like an old skin. This can feel like death, and in many ways it is, but it is a death that precedes rebirth. The ego dies to its illusions so that the self can rise with its truth. The self is the center and the whole of the psyche. It is who we are in essence, not as an idea, but as a living presence. The self includes the conscious and the unconscious, the known and the unknown. It is not a fixed state, but a dynamic unfolding. We never arrive at the self. We become more of it through each act of courage, honesty, and integration. It is the North Star of our inner journey, always guiding, always calling us back to what is most authentic. Individuation is not reserved for mystics, therapists, or philosophers. It is for anyone who has suffered and wondered why, for anyone who has dreamed of more and felt it was possible, for anyone who has glimpsed a deeper self and longed to live from it. The path is difficult, yes, but it is also beautiful. Each insight brings light, each step brings freedom, and with each transformation we become less a product of the world and more an expression of the soul. There are patterns that seem to follow us throughout life, certain emotions, dreams, relationships, and circumstances that recur with a strange familiarity. Even as we grow older, move to different places, or enter new roles, we often find ourselves confronted by the same inner questions and struggles. These are not accidents, nor are they meaningless repetitions. They are signs that the psyche is engaged in a deeper process of integration, asking us to attend to what has been overlooked, repressed, or not yet understood. These repeating motifs, whether they manifest as external events or internal conflicts, are part of what we call recurring life themes and symbols. To the rational mind, such repetition may appear as a flaw or coincidence. But to the symbolic mind, the deeper intuitive psyche, it is a language. Just as a dream repeats symbols to gain our attention, so too does life repeat scenarios that mirror the unresolved tensions within us. A person may find themselves repeatedly in relationships where they feel abandoned or dominated. Another may constantly struggle with authority, sabotaging any position of power they attain. These outward patterns reflect inner dynamics. The same story plays out in new costumes, not because we are cursed or broken, but because something essential within us seeks completion. In the symbolic world view, time is not strictly linear. The psyche moves in cycles and spirals, returning to old wounds and old desires with new layers of meaning. The child who once longed to be seen by a distant parent may grow into an adult who craves recognition in their career, only to find that no title or praise truly satisfies. Why? Because the original longing was not for applause, but for authentic connection. Until the wound is understood and the projection withdrawn, the pattern persists. It is not life punishing us, it is the soul attempting to be heard. Themes do not repeat arbitrarily, they repeat because the underlying energy has not yet been integrated. In Jungian psychology, this energy often resides in the unconscious, operating outside of our awareness but deeply influencing our choices. We may believe we are making rational decisions, but if the same suffering keeps emerging, it is likely that an unconscious complex is at work. These complexes are like emotional subpersonalities formed by past experiences, especially those charged with strong affect. They carry their own voice, perspective, and agenda. They are not evil, but they are autonomous, and if not made conscious, they shape our fate. One of the most powerful tools for recognizing recurring life themes is the dream. Dreams strip away the distractions of waking life and offer direct insight into the psyche's current landscape. A recurring dream image, a locked door, a broken staircase, an endless hall, may appear over years, always slightly altered, but always echoing the same unresolved feeling. Such images are not random. They are symbols, or what Jung called transformers of psychic energy, pointing to what needs to be acknowledged and transformed. Symbols differ from signs. A sign points to something specific. It has a fixed meaning. A symbol, on the other hand, contains multiple layers of significance and often evokes emotion beyond what words can express. The snake, for example, is a potent symbol found in myth and dream alike. It may represent danger, wisdom, sexuality, healing, or transformation, depending on the context and the individual's psychological state. When a snake appears repeatedly in someone's life, in dreams, in art, in synchronicities, It is not a literal message, but a symbolic one. It asks what in your life must shed its skin, what truth lies coiled at the base of your awareness, waiting to rise. Recurring themes often emerge more clearly during transitional periods. When we change jobs, enter or leave relationships, confront illness, or experience loss, the psyche opens. These thresholds or liminal spaces are where the unconscious speaks more loudly. We may notice the return of childhood dreams, old emotional patterns, or even synchronicities that seem too meaningful to ignore. These are moments when the boundary between the known and the unknown becomes permeable, allowing what was hidden to surface. The psyche is purposeful. It is always moving toward wholeness, even when that movement feels chaotic. Recurring symbols serve this purpose. They challenge us to go deeper, to ask, what is the meaning behind this repetition? What am I being asked to see, accept, or change? Often, we find that the external problem we face is a mirror of an inner conflict. The dominating boss may reflect an unintegrated inner tyrant. The elusive partner may represent the denied feminine or masculine aspect within. When we shift our focus from blaming the outer world to exploring the inner landscape, transformation begins. In Jungian thought, this process is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering who we are. The self, the totality of our psyche, already exists in potential. The ego, which governs our conscious identity, must learn to listen to the deeper voice of the self. Recurring life themes are one of the ways the self speaks. They are not punishments, they are invitations. Each repetition offers a chance to respond differently, to act with more awareness, to make a new choice. And with each new response, the psyche becomes more integrated. Sometimes these themes span generations. What we cannot resolve may be passed down as emotional inheritance. Family systems carry unconscious patterns: addiction, abandonment, betrayal, silence. Children often carry the unlived lives of their parents. Without conscious reflection, we may find ourselves living out someone else's unfinished story. But when we recognize the pattern, we gain the power to interrupt it. To break a generational cycle is not only an act of personal healing, but a gift to those who came before and those who will come after. Not all recurring symbols are painful. Some are reminders of our calling, our potential, our true path. A person may find that every time they feel lost, they encounter the same symbol: a feather, a certain melody, a book that falls from a shelf. These are what Jung called synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that point to a hidden order. The universe, through the psyche, leaves breadcrumbs. If we learn to follow them, we begin to live not just a life of reaction, but a life of purpose. In myths and fairy tales, the hero is often tested by the same challenge in different forms. This is not poor storytelling, it is psychological truth. The dragon must be faced again and again, not because the story cannot move forward, but because the hero is not yet ready to move forward. Each encounter brings a new lesson, a deeper courage, a more refined awareness. Life, too, operates this way. The themes recur until we have extracted their wisdom. When we finally act from that wisdom, the pattern dissolves, not because the outer world has changed, but because we have. These repetitions may seem frustrating, but they are evidence that the psyche remembers. It does not forget what needs to be healed or fulfilled. Even when we try to distract ourselves, suppress the feeling, or rationalize the pain, the unconscious persists. It sends dreams, symptoms, relationships, art, and synchronicities, all bearing the same message: there is something here for you, look again. To live a symbolic life is to see with more than just the eyes. It is to interpret our experiences not only in terms of cause and effect, but also in terms of meaning and connection. It is to ask not just what happened, but what is this asking of me, and what pattern does this reflect? This is not a passive stance. It requires courage, curiosity, and honesty, but it is the only way to truly dialogue with the soul. In this light, life becomes a story not of random events, but of meaningful unfolding. The past is no longer a chain, but a source of insight. The present is no longer a battleground, but a canvas, and the future is not a void, but a mystery alive with possibility. We are not victims of our patterns, we are stewards of them. They are the threads that, when woven consciously, reveal the deeper tapestry of our becoming. And through this sacred weaving we align more closely with the timeless intelligence that speaks through recurring life themes and symbols. There are moments in human life when we are pulled in opposing directions. One part of us clings to the familiar, seeks safety in structure, and resists what threatens the known. Another part aches to grow, to express truth, to enter the unknown, even if it means disintegration of identity. This is not merely indecision, it is not confusion or immaturity, it is the evidence of a deeper psychological conflict, one that forms the very axis of the human journey. It is the eternal tension between ego and soul. The ego, in its essence, is not the villain it is sometimes portrayed to be. It is a necessary function of the psyche, tasked with creating and maintaining our sense of identity in the external world. It distinguishes self from other, organizes our experiences, and negotiates with the demands of reality. The ego allows us to build careers, form relationships, establish boundaries, and survive within society. It is not evil, it is essential. However, it is limited. The soul, by contrast, is vast, ancient, and elusive. It does not conform to the linear logic of the ego. It speaks in symbols, dreams, intuitions, and yearnings that often cannot be explained. It is not bound by the rules of culture or time. The soul belongs to the realm of mystery and depth. Where the ego seeks clarity and control, the soul invites surrender. Where the ego desires consistency and certainty, the soul embraces paradox and transformation. The conflict begins when these two aspects of the psyche pull in opposite directions. The ego may want security, reputation, and stability, while the soul craves meaning, purpose, and authenticity. The ego may fear the risk of change, while the soul sees change as the path to becoming. This tension is not pathological, it is archetypal. It is the engine of psychological development, the very source of our individuation. Individuation, that sacred journey toward wholeness, cannot occur without this conflict. The ego must be challenged by the soul, for it is only in the face of such challenge that the ego grows in humility and depth, and the soul must confront the ego, for without embodiment the soul remains a vague longing, disconnected from life. It is in the crucible of their tension that transformation occurs. Often this conflict erupts in crisis. A person who has followed the path laid out for them, perhaps a profession chosen for prestige or a life built to meet the expectations of family, may wake up one day with a sense of emptiness. They have done everything right, and yet something feels terribly wrong. The symptoms may vary: anxiety, fatigue, creative block, restlessness. But underneath them all is a single truth. The soul is no longer content to be ignored. At first the ego resists. It interprets the soul's voice as irrational, disruptive, even dangerous. Why throw away what we've built? Why step into uncertainty? But the more the ego suppresses the soul's signals, the more they intensify. Dreams become vivid and unsettling, synchronicities arise, inner and outer conflicts increase, the ego's grip begins to weaken, not through force, but through necessity. The journey into soul is often marked by descent. We are pulled away from the light of certainty into the shadows of the unconscious. Here we encounter not only our pain and unmet desires, but also our potential, qualities we denied or disowned in order to maintain the ego's carefully curated self-image. These rejected aspects form what Jung called the shadow, and it is only by embracing the shadow that we begin to integrate the soul. This descent can be terrifying, for it dismantles the structures we have relied on. But it is also sacred. The myths and religious traditions of the world are filled with such descent. Sinana into the underworld, Christ into the tomb, Odysseus into Hades. These are not only spiritual metaphors, they are psychological maps. They reflect the necessity of the ego's death to make space for the emergence of the deeper self. It is crucial to note that the ego is not to be annihilated, but transformed. The goal is not to dissolve the ego into some mystical soup, but to reorient it in service of the soul. This requires the ego to release its illusions